12. We're looking today at Ruth chapter 2, verses 8 to 16. The new life begins. And of course, we're talking about the new life for Ruth and Naomi. So, what have we seen so far? Well, we've seen two itinerant widows who need help. They have no means of support other than what they can raise themselves. Even though they're back in Israel, in Bethlehem, Naomi should have relatives there, but there's no indication that they made any contact with those relatives or that the relatives have offered to help. But that's about to change. The younger widow has taken the responsibility to step up and support the two of them. A man with the wherewithal to help, if he so chose, is on the scene now. Of course, that is Boaz. The man learned the name of the young widow, Ruth, who is a foreigner from a country of one of Israel's main adversaries during the time of the Judges and during the Exodus leading up to that particular point. In this segment, we're going to see that Boaz's curiosity is rising. Now, we may change the word from curiosity to interest. Remember, Ruth is very likely a very attractive young woman. And it's going to increase where Ruth is concerned. He's going to start paying attention to this young widow. After checking with his foreman, Boaz spoke to Ruth. The foreman gave Boaz a rundown on who Ruth was. Evidently, we'll find out Boaz knew quite a bit about her from scuttlebutt around Bethlehem. It's not a very big town, so word gets around. Let's start in verse 8 of chapter 2. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids," that is, his servant girls who were helping with the harvest. My daughter, of course, implies that Boaz is probably older than Ruth, and probably at least a full generation older than Ruth. He may have been Naomi's age, or scholars say he probably was in the range from 45 to 55. Doesn't say specifically, but evidently he's a bit older than Ruth. Ruth could have been in her 20s, Boaz late 40s or even 50s. So somewhere maybe a 20 to 30 year difference in age. If that doesn't seem to play into it, we'll see a comment in the next session or so where there's a reference to that. His invitation, Boaz's invitation, was for Ruth to stay and glean exclusively in his field until the harvests, plural, harvests, including the wheat harvest as well as the barley. This was the barley harvest. The wheat harvest came after it. And he invited Ruth to stay while all that was going on till the harvest was complete. That probably would have been, say, from late April to early June. Could have been up to 6, 7 weeks. So for, 5, 6, 7 weeks, Ruth would have been gathering grain to support the life of Naomi and herself. Now, Boaz was certainly going well beyond the letter of the law in making this invitation. Remember, typically the gleaners had to wait until the harvest was over and the harvesters had left the field. Then they could come in and clean up. But Ruth is invited already and well beyond that. You normally don't ask a gleaner to stay. They stay until they get it done or they move on. You have no control over them. And you have, if you were a farmer, had no particular interest in them. You just know that the law required that you leave something for those who needed to glean. Moreover, the invitation seems to have included some perks that would typically be reserved for his serving girls working the harvest. Lunch, for example, drinking water that some of the men would have probably drawn, maybe the women drew it, but the drinking water was there for the harvesters to have access to, not gleaners, harvesters. And then there was a shelter where the harvesters could rest out of the sun if need be. Now, so Ruth evidently is being invited to take part in all of those things. We'll see that coming up shortly. The male harvest workers were thought to be a crude bunch, both in language and behavior. So Boaz took an extra precaution to protect Ruth. He protected her. Essentially, he's going to tell these guys, keep your hands off. And he means more than that. He means no bad mouthing, no giving her a hard time, no giving her the runaround. Let her do as she will do. Furthermore, Ruth, as we said, when having access to these things that normally gleaners don't have access to, they have to fend for themselves. So Boaz is going out of his way. Look at verse 9. Let your eyes be on the field which they, that is his servant girls, which they reap, and go after them. You notice, doesn't say wait till they leave. He says go after them while they're on the field. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. That's what he told the men. Keep your hands off. Leave her alone. Don't bug her. Don't harass her. When you're thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. So the men apparently draw the water, and everyone working the harvest participates in drinking it. And Ruth was invited as a gleaner, an outsider, to do that thing, of those things. Again, the men cut the barley with sickles or scythes, and the women then tied them into bundles called sheaves, and they stack them around to be picked up later and taken to the threshing floor. Something else what was Ruth told? She was told to follow the women as they tied the sheaves. Normally, again, gleaners had to wait until the harvest workers finished and left. I'm not even sure, but what they had to wait until the entire harvest was over, not just the day's event. So Boaz's interest in Ruth seems to be picking up a bit. She was very, very clearly receiving preferential treatment. And we'll find in verse 10 that she responded appropriately according to the custom of the day. It goes something like this. Then she fell on her face, that's Ruth, bowing to the ground and said to him, Boaz, why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? This is an act that occurs several times in the Old Testament. One is a little bit later between Abigail and David. I don't know if you remember the story from 1 Samuel, but David was out with his troops and he came to a field owned by Nabal, N-A-B-A-L, and asked Nabal for some food or some help. And Nabal essentially gave him a hard time, told him to get lost, insulted him, and David was furious, was in a mood to kill him and destroy his property, those sorts of things. But Nabal's wife, Abigail, steps in. We read this in 1 Samuel 25, verse 23. When Abigail, who had learned about this, by the way, saw David, she hurried and dismounted from her donkey and fell on her face before David and bowed herself to the ground. So she was bowing to the king in humility. and she wanted to turn David from trying to kill her husband and stop that slaughter. So, like Abigail, Ruth had acted with humility. Abigail to David the king, Ruth to Boaz, who we will find out is a relative. Well, we've already been told that he's a relative. But she did a play on words. It's kind of interesting. I don't know exactly how to make this make sense to us, but the words, notice she said, take notice of me, a foreigner. Well, take notice is from the same Hebrew word as foreigner. So foreigner really could mean to recognize or to be conspicuous. So she's saying, how do you take notice of me, someone who shouldn't be noticed? And finding favor, of course, means that she knew Boaz was acting with grace toward her. Favor can actually be translated grace reasonably. But she seems not to have known why Boaz was being so kind. That's why she asked. Evidently, she did not yet know the family connection between Boaz and Naomi. Naomi evidently hadn't told her, nor had Boaz, except he let them know now that he knows Naomi, or knows of Naomi at least at this point. Verse 11. Boaz answered and said to her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law, which is Naomi, after the death of your husband. So he knew Naomi. He knew about the death of Naomi's son, Ruth's husband. And he says, it has been fully reported to me. Again, gossip or asking questions around a small town. You can learn these things. And how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and came to a people you did not previously know. And it's kind of interesting because those last words of Boaz sounded pretty much like Abraham's call out of Ur, which we see in Genesis 12:1. Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country and from your relatives, and from your father's house, to the land which I will show you, a land, of course, that Abram had never been in. So Abram's call, Abraham later called, his call was very similar to what Ruth did. We pointed that out, remember, 2 or 3 sessions ago, that there's a lot of comparison between Ruth's call and behavior and Abram's call and his behavior. So while Boaz had never met Ruth prior to this, evidently at least, he was aware of her. He knew Naomi and he knew of the relationship between the two of them. He probably knew of Elimelech's death, Naomi's husband. He seemed to know of the widowhood of both Naomi and Ruth. He apparently knew Ruth was Naomi's daughter-in-law. And he was aware of Ruth's treatment of Naomi, respecting Naomi, sticking with her, being a helpmeet to her. And remember, Bethlehem was a small town, so Boaz could have found this out very easily, or maybe even without trying, who knows. Well, he continues in verse 12. Listen to what Boaz says to Ruth. May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. There's an interesting play coming up on words, the word wing here, for example, and we'll see it probably in the next session. So we'll leave it for that. There's a little bit of mystery involved there. And again, another play on words. So anyhow, Boaz seemed to understand that Ruth's decision to follow Naomi included her conversion to and her faith in Yahweh, the God of Israel. So his words here were a prayer, And notice, it's a prayer, and we will see shortly, it's a prayer in which he, Boaz himself, would be the answer to that prayer. Everything that happens positively to Ruth from this point on involves Boaz at the behest of Yahweh. So again, Ruth humbly shows her appreciation for what Boaz has done and what Boaz has just said in verse 13. Then she, Ruth, said, I have found favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants. She says, I am your maidservant, but I know I'm not even of the stature of your hired girls. So her humility showing again, and she verbally acknowledged being a foreigner below even the status of Boaz's servant girls. So Boaz evidently becomes even more generous, and his interest apparently is growing systematically here. Got to remember, you got this old guy and this young widow, and we'll find out the old guy's not married. Keep that in mind. That's why this is known as one beautiful love story. And at mealtime, this is verse 14, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. I guess that vinegar is some kind of wine mixture with something else in it that made it a tolerable thirst quencher. So she sat beside the reaper, she sat with the servant girls, and he, Boaz, served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. Remember this had some left? We're going to see the leftovers show up next session. Boaz had invited Ruth to lunch with the harvest hands. She ate what the hired help ate. She had more than she could eat. Boaz served her himself. Notice, he, an Israeli, served the Gentiles and probably ate with her. We're not told specifically. Imagine he ate with her. So if those of you looked in Galatians and see where where Paul jumped Peter about not eating with Gentiles, we will see that Boaz is just the opposite. Not only did he eat with the Gentile, he actually served her as well. So normally you wouldn't expect to find a farmer or a landlord, especially an Israelite farmer or a landlord, who would feed and eat with a gleaner, one who's gleaner, someone who's gleaning in his field. He wouldn't feed and eat with him, nor would he feed and eat with a Gentile. Boaz did both, apparently. But here, that's where Boaz does this. He treats Ruth better, much better than Ruth would have expected, or anybody else for that matter. I'm sure that the harvesters were surprised at what he was doing and saying they'll get a chance to even be more surprised in these next two verses. Listen to this, beginning in verse 16. When she rose to glean, Boaz commanded his servants, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves. That means let her glean while you're working and tying up these sheaves. Do not insult her. And also you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles and leave it that she may glean. And do not rebuke her. Wow, did you see that? 4 commands he gave the men of his harvest crew. Let Ruth glean while you men and women work. Do not insult her because she's a gleaner. Leave some free grain for her to find. I got quotes around the word find there. Do not say one word to stop her. Stay out of her way, let her do what she wants. In modern language, how would Don Horner translate it? Well, this. No waiting. Let her glean alongside you while you reap. Quietly salt the field with a little grain to make it easier pickings. But don't be obvious and don't say anything. Treat Ruth with respect. That's fundamentally the extent to which Boaz is going to make things better for Ruth. Well, the best part of the story is just beginning. One's estimate of Boaz is going to grow. Even now it's great, but it's going to grow even more as the narrative continues. And wait until you see what Naomi comes up with. What kind of a plan Naomi sets out with Ruth. Our takeaways, just a couple here, pretty generic. God actively oversees the paths of his children. He obviously was helping with Ruth's path to make things easier for Ruth, more successful for Ruth, and leading into the next part of the story. Humility, which Ruth displayed, is an attractive trait. Displaying grace toward another person is also an attractive trait. When you're praying in intercessory prayer, be aware that you might be the answer to your own prayer. That's what's going to happen to Boaz. Well, in the next session, we're going to see the story begin to unfold as Naomi gets involved. Naomi's going to get involved, believing that Boaz's interest in Ruth has been growing, instructing Ruth in her relationship with Boaz, how to act, understanding that Boaz is a man of integrity, a man of some means, and a man of some importance, and remembering that Boaz is a family member. And keeping in mind, finally, the idea of the levirate marriage, which we've discussed before. We'll discuss again very soon. Hope to see you next time.